Holy shit, Reddit. Holy fucking shit. I still can't believe I'm typing this, but I need to get this story out there because it's eating me alive, keeping it to myself. This is going to be long as hell because there's no way to tell this story without all the insane details that led to the most unbelievable plot of my entire existence. So first, some background. I'm 29, been working as an emergency room nurse at St. Mary's General Hospital in Denver for 8 years. Started right out of nursing school when I was 21, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, thinking I was going to save the world one patient at a time. What a naive little shit I was. Don't get me wrong, I still love nursing. I love helping people when they're at their worst moments. But the healthcare system in America is so fucking broken that sometimes it feels like you're trying to heal people with your bare hands, while corporate overlords are actively trying to sabotage you for profit margins. Our hospital got bought out by some massive healthcare corporation about 2 years ago, and things went to shit fast. They cut staffing, increased patient loads, and brought in this new breed of administrators who cared more about quarterly earnings than whether people lived or died. The worst of these corporate zombies was our night shift supervisor, Mrs. Helen Rodriguez. This woman was 58 years old and had the personality of a rusty nail dipped in vinegar. She'd been working at the hospital for 15 years and had climbed the ladder by being the most ruthless rule follower in the building. I swear this woman would let a patient die if saving them required filling out the wrong form in triplicate. Rodriguez ran the night shift like a fucking military dictatorship. Her office had these motivational posters that were actually demotivational as hell. Stuff like efficiency over empathy and time is money, money is medicine. I shit you not, she had a poster that said policy over people hanging right behind her desk. Her favorite phrase was, stay at your station, follow protocol, don't think, just do your job. She said it so often that some of the nurses started a drinking game where you had to take a shot every time she said it during a shift. We stopped playing after Jimmy from ICU almost died of alcohol poisoning. I'd already had 2 run-ins with Rodriguez in the past year. The first was when I spent excessive time, her words, comforting Mrs. Patterson, an 82-year-old woman who was dying alone because her family couldn't afford to fly in from Oregon. I held her hand for her last 30 minutes, and Rodriguez wrote me up for misallocation of nursing resources. The second time was when I brought coffee and a sandwich to Mr. Garcia's son, who had been sitting in the waiting room for 14 hours while his dad was in surgery. Rodriguez saw me and screamed at me in front of everyone about how we weren't a charity food service and that I was enabling dependency behaviors in family members. This woman was a fucking monster, but she had the backing of the new administration, so she was untouchable. Now let me paint you a picture of what night shift ER nursing is like, especially after the corporate takeover. We went from a 5-to-1 patient to nurse ratio to 8-to-1, sometimes 10-1 on really bad nights. That means I'm responsible for monitoring, medicating, and caring for up to 10 seriously ill people simultaneously, often with life-threatening conditions. These aren't just people with the sniffles. We get heart attacks, strokes, overdoses, car accidents, domestic violence victims, attempted suicides, and everything else you can imagine. Each patient requires constant monitoring, detailed documentation, medication administration, and coordination with doctors, specialists, and family members. Meanwhile, Rodriguez sits in her office doing paperwork and emerges every hour to remind us about efficiency metrics and cost containment protocols. The woman hadn't touched a patient in over 5 years, but she sure had a lot of opinions about how we should be doing our jobs. So that brings us to January 15th, the night that changed my entire fucking life. It was one of those brutal Colorado winter nights where the temperature drops to like minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit and the wind cuts through you like frozen knives. We'd had a steady stream of hypothermia cases, car accidents from icy roads, and the usual collection of people whose chronic conditions get worse in extreme weather. I was assigned to beds 12 through 18, 7 patients, which is actually light for us. Bed 12 was Mr. Peterson, a 68-year-old recovering from emergency bypass surgery who kept pulling out his IV lines because he was confused from the anesthesia. Bed 13 was Maria Santos, a 34-year-old who'd been beaten unconscious by her boyfriend and was waiting for the police to finish taking her statement. Bed 14 was Trevor Williams, a 19-year-old kid who'd overdosed on fentanyl and was lucky to be alive. Bed 15 was Mrs. Kim, an 87-year-old with pneumonia who spoke almost no English and whose family was frantically trying to drive through the snowstorm to get to her. Bed 16 was James Crawford, a 45-year-old construction worker who'd fallen off scaffolding and had a suspected spinal injury. Bed 17 was Baby Doe, a 6-month-old who'd been brought in by CPS after showing signs of abuse, which always broke my fucking heart. And Bed 18 was Michael Torres, a 52-year-old having an anxiety attack that turned out to be an actual heart attack. So yeah, I was juggling 7 seriously ill people, trying to keep them all alive and comfortable while documenting everything in our shitty computer system that crashes every 20 minutes. It was around 3:47 a.m. when I noticed the commotion outside. I was checking Baby Doe's vitals. The poor little thing had a broken rib and bruises that made me want to hunt down whoever hurt them, when I saw lights flashing in the employee parking lot. Through the reinforced windows of the ER, I could see our security guard Marcus talking on his radio. Marcus is a good guy, 55 years old, former cop who took the hospital job after he got injured on duty. He's usually pretty quick to respond to problems, but tonight he seemed to be moving really slowly toward whatever was happening. I tried to ignore it and focus on my patients, but something felt wrong. Marcus kept pointing toward the far end of the parking lot, near where it meets the street. There's a chain link fence there that separates our property from a vacant lot, and homeless people sometimes try to shelter there when it's really cold. That's when I saw him. Even from inside the ER, I could tell something was seriously wrong. There was a person hunched against the fence near the dumpsters, and as I watched, he suddenly collapsed forward onto his knees and then face first into the snow. My nursing instincts kicked in immediately. The way he fell wasn't like someone who was drunk or high. This was medical distress. This was someone whose body was shutting down. I looked around the ER. Rodriguez was in her office with the door closed, probably doing her nightly reports. The other nurses were busy with their own patients. Dr. Williams was in Trauma Bay 2, working on a car accident victim. Marcus was still about 100 yards away from the collapsed person, moving at the speed of molasses and probably radioing for backup instead of actually helping. This person needed help now. I want to be clear about something. I knew exactly what I was risking. Rodriguez had made it crystal fucking clear that leaving our assigned patients was grounds for immediate suspension. But I also knew that if I just stood there and watched someone die in our parking lot, I'd never be able to live with myself. I made the choice that I was absolutely certain would end my career. I grabbed a portable first aid kit and oxygen tank from the supply closet and ran toward the exit. The automatic doors seemed to take forever to slide open, and then I was outside in the absolute brutal cold of a Denver winter night. The wind hit me like a physical slap. I was wearing scrubs and a thin cardigan, absolutely zero protection against sub-zero temperatures. The snow was coming down hard, making it difficult to see, and my feet immediately started slipping on the ice as I ran toward the collapsed figure. As I got closer, I could see this was a man, probably in his 40s, wearing what looked like an old military jacket that had seen much better days. The jacket was too big for him, which told me he'd lost a lot of weight recently. His boots had holes in them, and I could see his toes through the torn fabric. No socks, just bare skin exposed to the freezing cold. He was lying face down in the snow, not moving. When I reached him and gently turned him over, I got my first good look at his face, and it broke my fucking heart. This wasn't some strung-out junkie like Rodriguez would have assumed. This was someone who had clearly been handsome once, with intelligent eyes and strong features. But those eyes were unfocused and glassy. His lips were blue from lack of oxygen, and his skin had that waxy grey colour that tells you someone is in serious medical trouble. His hair was prematurely grey and matted, and he had a thick beard that was full of ice crystals. But beneath all the dirt and exhaustion, I could see intelligence, pain, and a deep soul-crushing defeat that went way beyond physical illness. "Sir?" I knelt down in the snow next to him, my knees immediately soaking through from the slush. "Sir, can you hear me? I'm Sarah. I'm a nurse from the hospital. Can you tell me what's wrong?" He tried to focus on me, his eyes struggling to track my face. When he tried to speak, only a weak, raspy wheeze came out. His breathing was shallow and laboured, maybe 8 to 10 breaths per minute when it should have been 12 to 20. His pulse was weak and irregular, probably around 50 beats per minute. This man was dying. I immediately started assessing him the way I'd been trained. Airway, partially obstructed by secretions. Breathing, severely compromised. Circulation, weak and thready pulse. Blue fingernails indicating poor oxygenation. His hands were ice cold and I could feel how thin he was under the bulky jacket. This man hadn't had a proper meal in weeks, maybe months. "Okay, I'm going to put this oxygen mask on you," I told him, getting the portable tank ready. "It's going to help you breathe better." He shook his head weakly and tried to push my hands away. No hospitals," he managed to whisper. Can't pay, no insurance." Jesus fucking Christ. Here was a man who was literally dying, and he was more afraid of the medical bills than he was of death itself. This is America, folks. Land of the free, home of the people who die rather than bankrupt their families. "Hey, look at me," I said firmly, grabbing his face gently to make eye contact. "Right now, we're not worried about money. Right now, we're worried about keeping you breathing. Everything else we can figure out later." I got the oxygen mask over his face and immediately saw improvement in his colour. His oxygen saturation was probably in the 70s when it should have been above 95. The man was suffocating. Marcus finally reached us, huffing and puffing from his walk across the parking lot. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing out here? Mrs. Rodriguez has been looking for you for the past 10 minutes. "This man is having a medical emergency," I said without looking up. "Respiratory distress, possible hypothermia, definitely malnourished. We need to get him inside immediately." Marcus looked uncomfortable and kept glancing back toward the hospital. "I don't know, Sarah. You know the rules about treating people in the parking lot. If he's not arriving by ambulance or through the ER entrance, he needs to go through the front desk and get registered first." I stared at him in disbelief. "Marcus, look at this man. He's barely conscious. He can't walk to the front desk, and by the time we get him registered and through the bureaucratic bullshit, he could be dead." "But the liability issues," Marcus started. "Fuck the liability issues," I snapped. "This is a human being." The man grabbed my arm with surprising strength and pulled the oxygen mask away from his face. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Don't want to be a burden. Just let me." He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he was trying to say. He'd rather die than cause trouble. He'd rather die than cost the hospital money they'd never recover. I looked into his eyes and saw something that made my decision for me. This wasn't just about medical emergency anymore. This was about a human being who had been failed by the system so many times that he would literally rather die in a parking lot than ask for help. "You are not a burden," I said firmly, my voice getting stronger. "You are a person, and you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And I don't give a flying fuck what the rules say. We're getting you inside, and we're going to take care of you." I turned to Marcus. "Help me get him onto a gurney, or I'll drag him inside myself." Marcus looked torn between following protocol and doing the right thing. Finally, his basic human decency won out. "Okay, but this is on you, Sarah. Rodriguez is going to lose her shit. Let her." The next 30 minutes were a blur of activity that I'll remember for the rest of my life. We got the man, who told us his name was Robert Chen during a brief moment of clarity, onto a gurney and into Trauma Bay 4. As soon as Dr. Williams saw Robert's condition, he went into full emergency mode. This is why I love working with Dr. Williams. He's one of the old school doctors who became a physician because he wanted to help people, not because he wanted to get rich. "Jesus Christ, what do we have here?" Dr. Williams asked, immediately starting his assessment. "Found him collapsed in the parking lot," I said, giving him the quick rundown. "Respiratory distress, hypothermia, severe malnutrition. He's been homeless for an unknown period of time." Dr. Williams was already listening to Robert's chest with his stethoscope. "Pneumonia, probably bacterial, sounds like it's heading towards sepsis. Sarah, I need a full CBC, comprehensive metabolic panel, blood cultures, chest x-ray, and get him on IV antibiotics immediately. Also get me a glucose level. I'm betting he's hypoglycemic." "Already on it," I said, pulling up the orders in the computer system. This is the part of nursing I love, when everything else falls away and it's just about saving someone's life. All the politics, all the corporate bullshit, all the bureaucracy disappears, and you remember why you became a healthcare worker in the first place. Robert's veins were absolute shit, collapsed from dehydration and malnutrition. It took me 3 tries to get an IV line started, but I finally got one in his left forearm. His blood sugar was 45 milligrams daily when it should have been between 70 to 100. No wonder he'd collapsed. The chest x-ray showed bilateral pneumonia with early signs of ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. His white blood cell count was through the roof, confirming the infection. His kidney function was borderline, probably from dehydration. This man was sicker than I'd initially thought. Dr. Williams started him on broad-spectrum antibiotics, IV fluids, and dextrose for his low blood sugar. We also got him on continuous oxygen monitoring and started warming him up slowly to treat the hypothermia. It was while I was adjusting his IV drip rate that Rodriguez appeared. "Mitchell?" Her voice was like ice cracking. I turned around and saw her standing in the doorway of the trauma bay, her face twisted into an expression of absolute fury. "A word, now." I looked at Robert, who was finally starting to look more stable with the oxygen and IV fluids running. "I'll be right back," I told him softly. Rodriguez led me to an empty patient room and closed the door behind us. Then she unleashed hell. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice a dangerous whisper. "Taking care of a patient who was dying," I said simply. "Taking care of a patient?" she repeated, her voice rising. "This man is not a patient. He's a vagrant who was trespassing on hospital property. Your job, your only job, is to care for the patients assigned to you in beds 12 through 18. I couldn't just watch someone die. You most certainly could have and should have. Do you know what this man's treatment is going to cost? Blood work, IV fluids, antibiotics, x-rays, monitoring. We're talking thousands of dollars in charges that will never ever be paid." She started pacing around the small room like a caged animal. "This hospital is not a charity, Mitchell. We are a business. We provide medical services to paying customers. We are not in the business of treating every homeless drug addict who wanders onto our property. He wasn't on drugs, I said. He was sick, pneumonia, malnutrition, hypothermia. He could have died. Then maybe he should have, she screamed, and I swear to God, I almost punched her in the face right then and there. Excuse me? I said, my voice deadly quiet. You heard me. These people, these homeless addicts and vagrants, they're a drain on society. They consume resources, they don't contribute anything, and they make choices that lead them to these situations. It's not our responsibility to save them from the consequences of their poor decisions. I stared at her in absolute disbelief. This woman was supposed to be a healthcare professional. She'd taken the same oath I had about doing no harm and treating all patients with dignity. That man served in the military, I said. I saw the tattoos on his arms. He's a veteran. I don't care if he's a decorated war hero, Rodriguez snapped. The moment he decided to live on the streets instead of getting a job and contributing to society, he forfeited any right to expect help from the rest of us. You're talking about a human being. I'm talking about a liability. Do you know what happens when we treat people who can't pay? The cost gets absorbed by the hospital, which means it comes out of our budget, which means less money for equipment, less money for staffing, less money for the people who actually matter. She pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. Mrs. Rodriguez, please. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately, she said, not looking up from her phone. I'm calling security to escort you from the building. You can collect your personal belongings from your locker, but you are not to have any further contact with patients, staff, or hospital property until further notice. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. You're suspending me for saving someone's life? I'm suspending you for abandoning your assigned patients to treat a non-patient, violating hospital policy regarding unauthorized treatment, creating a massive liability exposure for this hospital, and demonstrating a fundamental lack of judgment that makes you unfit for patient care responsibilities. She finished typing and looked up at me with cold satisfaction. Maybe this will teach you that being a nurse means following orders and hospital policy, not following your bleeding heart liberal bullshit. My hands were shaking with rage, but I somehow managed to keep my voice steady. And maybe this will teach you what it means to be a human being. Get out, she said. Security will be here in 5 minutes to escort you from the property. I walked back to Trauma Bay 4 to check on Robert one last time before I got kicked out. Dr. Williams was adjusting his oxygen flow and looking much more optimistic. How's he doing? I asked. Much better. You probably saved his life, Sarah. If he'd been out there much longer, the hypothermia and respiratory failure would have killed him. Good, I said, trying not to cry. That's good. Are you okay? You look upset. Rodriguez suspended me. I'm getting escorted out by security. Dr. Williams' face darkened. That fucking bitch. I'm going to talk to her. Don't, I said. It'll just make things worse for you. Take care of Robert, okay? Make sure he gets the treatment he needs. Of course. And Sarah, you did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Marcus showed up a few minutes later, looking uncomfortable as hell. Sarah, I'm really sorry about this. Rodriguez is making me escort you out. It's okay, Marcus. You're just doing your job. The walk to the employee locker room was humiliating. Other staff members stared as Marcus and I walked through the halls. Some looked sympathetic, others looked curious, and a few looked judgmental. Word travels fast in hospitals. I cleaned out my locker in a daze. 8 years of working at this place, and I was getting marched out like a criminal for saving someone's life. I had photos of my family, some spare scrubs, a few books, and the little succulent plant that my nephew had given me for my birthday. As I packed up my stuff, I thought about Robert. I wondered if he would be okay, if Dr. Williams would be able to treat his pneumonia before it turned into full-blown sepsis. I wondered what his story was, how he'd ended up living on the streets. I wondered if anyone would bother to find out, or if he'd just be another homeless veteran who slipped through the cracks. I also thought about my future. I'd been a nurse for 8 years, and I'd never been disciplined for anything more serious than being 10 minutes late to a shift because of a car accident. Now I had a suspension on my record for patient care violations, which is basically the kiss of death in healthcare. The drive home through the empty Denver streets was surreal. It was almost 5 a.m. and the city was still covered in snow from the storm. I passed 24-hour diners and gas stations where other night shift workers were just getting off duty, heading home to sleep while the rest of the world was waking up. When I got to my apartment, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the building where I'd lived for 4 years. Everything felt different now. My career, my future, my sense of purpose, all of it had been called into question by a single act of compassion. But you know what? I wasn't sorry. Even knowing the consequences, even facing unemployment and potential career suicide, I would make the same choice again. Some things are more important than hospital policy. Some things are more important than keeping your job. Some things are just fucking right. The next 3 weeks were the longest and most stressful of my professional life. I applied for temporary work at other hospitals in the Denver area, but word travels fast in the medical community. A suspension for patient care violations is a massive red flag that makes HR departments nervous as hell. Presbyterian St. Joseph will keep your application on file. National Jewish Health, we're not hiring at this time. Denver Health, your references don't meet our current standards. Translation, nobody wanted to touch a nurse who'd been suspended, regardless of the circumstances. I tried to find out what had happened to Robert, but the hospital wouldn't give me any information. Patient confidentiality laws, they said. I wasn't family, and I was no longer an employee, so they couldn't tell me shit about his condition or treatment. This was driving me absolutely crazy. I'd risked my entire career to save this man's life, and I had no idea if he was even still alive. For all I knew, he could have died from complications, or been discharged back to the streets, or been transferred to another facility. I started having nightmares about finding him dead in that parking lot because I hadn't acted fast enough. I'd wake up in cold sweats, replaying every detail of that night, wondering if I'd missed something important or made some crucial mistake. My savings account was draining fast. I lived paycheck to paycheck like most nurses, and suddenly I had no paycheck at all. I started applying for non-medical jobs, retail, food service, anything that would pay the bills while I figured out my next move. The worst part was the self-doubt. Had I made the right choice? Was Rodriguez right that I'd let my emotions override my professional judgment? Had I really abandoned my assigned patients to help someone who might have been better served by calling 911 and letting the paramedics handle it? Maybe I was just a bleeding heart idiot who didn't understand how the real world worked. Maybe I was naive to think that saving one homeless veteran was worth destroying my own career. Maybe Rodriguez was right that the system couldn't function if everyone started making individual moral decisions instead of following established protocols. The doubt was eating me alive. I spent my days scrolling through job listings, sending out resumes, and getting rejected. I spent my nights lying awake thinking about Robert, wondering what had happened to him, and questioning every choice I'd ever made. My sister Lisa called me every few days to check in. "Any word from the hospital?" she'd ask. "Nothing. It's like I never existed." "Have you thought about appealing the suspension? Maybe talking to a lawyer? With what money? And even if I won, do you think Rodriguez would ever let me forget it? She'd make my life hell until I quit anyway." "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know, Liz. I honestly don't know." The unemployment benefits helped a little, but they were a fraction of my nursing salary. I started shopping at discount grocery stores, cancelling subscriptions, and avoiding any unnecessary expenses. Pride became a luxury I couldn't afford. I was applying for a job at Target when I got the call that changed everything. It was Thursday morning, exactly 3 weeks and 2 days after my suspension. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my pajamas, filling out an online application for team member overnight stocking, when my phone rang. "Miss Mitchell, this is Janet Palmer from Human Resources at St. Mary's General Hospital." My heart immediately started pounding. This was it. They were calling to make my termination official. "Hi, Miss Palmer. I need you to come in for a meeting this afternoon at 2 p.m. regarding your employment status." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Can I ask what this meeting is about?" "It's a formal review of your suspension and future employment with the hospital. Please report to the main administrative conference room on the 5th floor. Mr. Davidson, our hospital administrator, will be conducting the meeting." I'd never met Mr. Davidson personally. He was one of those C-suite executives who operated from behind closed doors, making decisions that affected hundreds of employees without ever actually interacting with them. The fact that he was personally handling my case seemed like overkill for firing one nurse, unless they were planning to make an example of me. Maybe they wanted to document the termination thoroughly to send a message to other nurses about the consequences of violating policy. "Will anyone else be attending this meeting?" I asked. "Yes, there will be one other individual present, but I can't discuss the details over the phone." Probably Rodriguez, coming to watch my execution and gloat about how she'd been right all along. "Miss Mitchell, will you be able to attend?" "Yes," I said, because what choice did I have? "I'll be there at 2 p.m. "Thank you. Please bring any personal belongings you may have left at the hospital, as this will likely be your final visit to the facility." And there it was, my final visit. After 8 years of dedicated service, after literally saving someone's life, I was getting kicked to the curb like yesterday's garbage. I spent the morning trying to prepare for the inevitable. I updated my resume one more time, researched other career options outside of healthcare, and tried to figure out how I was going to explain a termination for cause to future employers. Maybe I could go back to school, get a degree in something completely different. Maybe I could move to another state where nobody knew about my suspension. Maybe I could start over completely and pretend this whole nightmare had never happened. But even as I was planning my escape from healthcare, I knew I'd never be able to forgive myself if I walked away from nursing. This was my calling, my passion, my identity. I was good at it, and I genuinely loved helping people. The fact that the system was broken didn't change the fact that patients needed advocates. I put on my best professional outfit, a navy blue suit I'd bought for job interviews, and drove to St. Mary's for what I assumed would be the last time. Walking into that hospital felt like returning to a crime scene. Everything looked exactly the same, but I was no longer part of it. I was an outsider now, a visitor in a place that had been my second home for 8 years. The elevator ride to the 5th floor felt endless. I'd never been to the administrative offices before. They were a completely different world from the clinical floors where I'd spent my career. Quiet, carpeted hallways lined with expensive artwork and motivational posters about excellence in healthcare delivery and patient satisfaction metrics. It was like corporate America had invaded a hospital and sanitized all the actual medicine out of it. Janet Palmer met me at the elevator. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, but her expression was professionally neutral, impossible to read. "Thank you for coming, Miss Mitchell. This way, please." She led me down a long hallway lined with conference rooms and executive offices. Through the windows, I could see administrators in expensive suits sitting behind massive desks, talking on phones and typing on laptops. The contrast with the medical floors below, where everyone wore scrubs and moved with urgent purpose, was striking. We stopped at the largest conference room, which had floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of downtown Denver and the Rocky Mountains in the distance. On a clear day, it probably would have been beautiful. Today, it just felt intimidating as hell. "Please have a seat," Janet said. "Mr. Davidson will be with you shortly." The conference room was designed to make people feel small and powerless. Massive mahogany table, leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent, walls covered with awards and certificates and photographs of hospital board members and corporate executives. I sat at the far end of the table and tried to calm my nerves. My hands were shaking slightly and I kept checking my phone for the time. 1:58 p.m. Any minute now, my professional life would officially come to an end. At exactly 2 p.m, the door opened and Mr. Davidson walked in. He was exactly what you'd expect from a hospital administrator. Tall, imposing, early 60s, silver hair, expensive suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. Everything about him radiated corporate authority and power. But he wasn't alone. Behind him was another man, and when I saw him, my brain basically short-circuited. It was Robert. But this wasn't the homeless, desperate, dying man I'd found collapsed in the parking lot 3 weeks ago. This Robert was clean-shaven, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit and carrying himself with quiet confidence and dignity. His hair was neatly trimmed, he looked healthy and strong, and he was carrying a leather briefcase like he belonged in this boardroom. For a moment, I wondered if I was hallucinating. The transformation was so complete that if I'd passed him on the street, I might not have recognized him. But it was definitely the same person, those intelligent eyes, that same gentle expression I remembered from that night in the ER. "Miss Mitchell," Mr. Davidson said, sitting down across from me. "Thank you for coming in today. I know the past few weeks have been difficult for you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak because I was still staring at Robert in shock. "Before we discuss your employment status," Mr. Davidson continued, "I want you to meet someone. This is Dr. Robert Chen. As of yesterday, Dr. Chen has been appointed as the new chief medical officer for our entire hospital system." I blinked hard, certain I had misheard. "Dr. Chen?" Robert smiled, the same gentle, grateful smile I remembered from that night in the parking lot when I'd put the oxygen mask on his face. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly. "I believe we've met." My mind was completely blown. The homeless veteran I'd found dying in the snow was a doctor? Not just any doctor, but the new chief medical officer of the entire hospital system? Mr. Davidson continued, seemingly oblivious to my shock. "Doctor Chen comes to us with an extremely impressive background. He's a former army trauma surgeon with over 15 years of experience in military medicine, including 3 deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. He has a medical degree from Johns Hopkins University and completed his residency in emergency medicine at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. He's board certified in emergency medicine and trauma surgery, and he's published extensively in peer-reviewed medical journals." I stared at Robert, Dr. Chen, trying to reconcile this information with the man I'd found collapsed and dying in our parking lot. "I don't understand," I said finally. Robert leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "Sarah, after you saved my life that night, I spent 4 days in the hospital recovering from pneumonia and severe malnutrition. During that time, I had a lot of opportunity to observe the staff, the protocols, and the way this hospital operates." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What I saw troubled me deeply. I saw nurses and doctors who were overworked and understaffed. I saw a system that prioritized profit margins over patient care. I saw corporate policies that actively discouraged compassion and human decency. And I saw what happened to you, a dedicated healthcare professional who was punished for showing basic human kindness. Mr. Davidson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly not enjoying this part of the conversation. Dr. Chen reached out to our board of directors, he said stiffly. He expressed interest in joining our leadership team to help address some of the operational challenges we've been facing. But I still don't understand, I said. How are you? That night you were homeless, Robert said simply, living on the streets of Denver for 2 years. He took a deep breath and I could see this wasn't easy for him to talk about. I came back from my 3rd deployment in Afghanistan with severe PTSD and a prescription opioid addiction that started with legitimate pain medication for combat injuries. When the prescription ran out, I turned to street drugs to manage the pain and the psychological trauma. The room was completely silent. Even Mr. Davidson had stopped fidgeting. I lost my medical license due to the addiction, lost my home, my savings, my marriage, my relationship with my children. Everything. I've been living rough for 2 years, trying to get clean, trying to find some way back to the person I used to be. Robert opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Night you found me. I had been clean and sober for 8 months, but I was sick and malnourished and had nowhere to go. I had given up hope that things would ever get better. I was literally preparing to die when you appeared. He looked directly at me, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. You didn't see a homeless drug addict or a drain on the healthcare system. You saw a human being who needed help, and you risked your career to provide that help. You treated me with dignity and respect when I couldn't even remember the last time someone had looked at me like I was worth saving. Robert handed me a document from his folder. After I recovered, contacted the Colorado Medical Board and petitioned to have my license reinstated. With 8 months of documented sobriety, completion of an addiction treatment program, and psychiatric evaluation confirming my fitness to practice medicine, they agreed to review my application. I looked at the document. It was an official letter from the Colorado Medical Board confirming the reinstatement of Robert Chen's medical license. I also reached out to several colleagues from my military service who vouched for my abilities as a physician and my character prior to my addiction issues, Robert continued. Dr. James Morrison from Walter Reed, Colonel Sarah Kim from the Army Medical Research Command, Dr. Michael Torres from Johns Hopkins, they all provided references. Mr. Davidson nodded, though he looked like he was sucking on a lemon. Dr. Chen's credentials and references were frankly impeccable. When he expressed interest in helping us reform our healthcare delivery system and improve our patient care outcomes, the board was very interested in his proposal. What kind of proposal? I asked. Robert smiled, and for the first time since he'd walked into the room, he looked genuinely excited. A complete overhaul of how this hospital approaches patient care, especially for vulnerable populations, evidence-based staffing ratios, comprehensive social services integration, addiction treatment programs, mental health support for staff and patients, and policies that prioritize compassion alongside clinical efficiency. He pulled out another document and handed it to me. But before I accepted the position, I made it clear that my first official act would be to address what happened to you, Sarah. The document was a formal letter of apology from the hospital, acknowledging that my suspension had been an inappropriate overreaction to a situation that required immediate medical intervention, and that my actions exemplified the highest standards of nursing care and human compassion. Your suspension has been officially lifted, Mr. Davidson said, though he looked like the words tasted bitter. All references to disciplinary action will be removed from your personnel file, and you'll receive full back pay for the time you were suspended. I stared at the letter, barely able to process what I was reading, but Robert wasn't finished. I've also instituted a new hospital-wide policy, he said, handing me another document. It's called the Good Samaritan Protocol. It states that any hospital employee who provides emergency medical care to someone in distress on hospital grounds, or who advocates for patient care that goes beyond standard protocols, will be commended and supported by hospital administration, regardless of their assigned duties at the time. I read the policy with growing amazement. It was comprehensive and clearly written, protecting healthcare workers who chose to prioritize patient welfare over bureaucratic procedures. Furthermore, Robert continued, I've conducted a comprehensive review of staffing levels throughout the hospital, and I've authorized the immediate hiring of 12 additional nurses for the emergency department, 6 new physicians and 4 social workers to help coordinate care for vulnerable patients. Mr. Davidson looked like he was about to have a stroke, but he nodded stiffly. The board has approved all of Dr. Chen's staffing recommendations and policy changes, he said through gritted teeth. What about Rodriguez? I asked. Robert's expression became more serious, but I could see a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez has been offered the opportunity to transfer to a day shift administrative position in medical records management, he said diplomatically. She felt that would be a better fit for her organizational skills and attention to detail. Translation: she'd been completely removed from patient care and stuck in a dead-end paperwork job where she couldn't hurt anyone. The new night shift supervisor is Janet Williams. You might know her from the ICU. She's someone who understands that patient care and administrative efficiency aren't mutually exclusive, and that compassionate treatment is actually an essential component of effective medical care. I knew Janet Williams. She was one of the good ones, a nurse who'd worked her way up to management without losing her soul in the process. But that's not all, Robert said, and his smile got even bigger. Sarah, I have a proposition for you. He pulled out one final document from his briefcase. I'm creating a new position, Director of Patient Advocacy and Community Outreach. It would involve working with both patients and staff to ensure that our hospital truly serves the needs of our community, especially the most vulnerable members. I stared at him in shock as he continued. The position comes with a significant salary increase, about 40% more than your current nursing salary, and the authority to make real changes in how we deliver care. You would report directly to me, and your job would be to make sure that no one, regardless of their ability to pay, their housing status, their immigration status, or their addiction issues, falls through the cracks of our healthcare system. My hands were literally shaking as I held the job description. You would oversee our new homeless outreach program, coordinate with social services and mental health providers, develop treatment protocols for addiction and PTSD, and serve as an advocate for patients who need someone to fight for them within the hospital bureaucracy. I felt tears forming in my eyes. 3 weeks ago, I'd thought my career was over. Now I was being offered a promotion and the chance to create systemic change in healthcare delivery. I don't know what to say, I managed. Say you'll take the job, Robert said with a grin. I need someone who understands that medicine is about more than just treating symptoms. I need someone who sees the person behind the patient, who's willing to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult or unpopular. I looked at Mr. Davidson, who was clearly struggling with this entire situation. Obviously, none of this had been his idea, and he was probably wondering how his orderly corporate hospital had suddenly been taken over by people who actually cared about patients. There is one more thing, Robert said, his expression becoming more serious. This position will require you to work closely with homeless populations, addiction patients, and people with severe mental health issues. It can be emotionally challenging work, and not everyone is cut out for it. Dr. Chen, I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. 3 weeks ago, I risked my entire career to help a homeless veteran I'd never met before. I think I can handle the emotional challenges. Robert's smile lit up the entire room. In that case, welcome to the team, Director Mitchell. I sat in that conference room for another hour as Robert and Mr. Davidson went over the details of my new position. Salary, benefits, office space, budget for the new programs, staffing requirements. It was all surreal as hell. When I finally walked out of that building, I felt like I was floating. 8 hours ago, I'd been applying for overnight stocking jobs at Target. Now I was the Director of Patient Advocacy at a major hospital system, with the authority to create real change in healthcare delivery. But the most amazing part wasn't the job or the salary or even the vindication. It was the knowledge that my choice that night, the choice to risk everything to help someone in need, had not only saved Robert's life, but had set in motion a chain of events that would help thousands of other people. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new office on the 4th floor of St. Mary's General Hospital. Through my window, I can see the parking lot where I first met Robert, where I made the decision that I thought would end my career, but instead changed my life forever. The Director of Patient Advocacy position has been everything Robert promised and more. In the past 6 months, we've implemented programs that have transformed how our hospital serves vulnerable populations. The Robert Chen Center for Homeless Healthcare, a dedicated clinic within the hospital that provides free medical care, mental health services, and addiction treatment for homeless individuals. No insurance required, no questions asked, no judgment. The Good Samaritan Fund, a hospital-sponsored program that covers medical costs for patients who can't afford treatment, funded partly by the hospital and partly by donations from staff and community members. The Veterans Advocacy Program, specialized services for homeless and at-risk veterans, including PTSD counseling, addiction treatment, and assistance with VA benefits and housing. The Compassionate Care Protocol, hospital-wide training for all staff on treating vulnerable populations with dignity and respect, and recognizing signs of homelessness, addiction, and mental health crises. Most importantly, we've changed the culture of our hospital. The Good Samaritan Protocol has been adopted by hospitals throughout Colorado and is being implemented in 12 other states. We've become a model for compassionate healthcare delivery that proves you can be both profitable and humane. Robert, Dr. Chen, has become not just my boss, but my mentor and friend. He's been clean and sober for over a year now, attending AA meetings twice a week and seeing a therapist to deal with his PTSD. He's also rebuilt his relationship with his children and has become one of the most respected medical administrators in Colorado. But the real change isn't in the policies or the programs or even the statistics. It's in the daily interactions between our staff and our patients. It's in the way we treat people, all people, with dignity and respect. Last week, I was called to the ER to help with a difficult case. A homeless woman named Patricia had been brought in by paramedics, suffering from severe hypothermia and alcohol withdrawal. She was belligerent, scared, and convinced that we were going to kick her out as soon as we realized she couldn't pay. The attending physician, Dr. Martinez, one of our new hires, was sitting beside her bed, talking to her gently and explaining her treatment options. "We're going to take care of you, Patricia," he was saying. "You're safe here, and you don't need to worry about money or insurance or anything else. Right now, we just want to help you feel better." Patricia started crying. "I haven't had anyone be nice to me in months," she whispered. Dr. Martinez held her hand. "Well, you're going to have a lot of people being nice to you here. That's what we do." I watched this interaction from the doorway, and I realized how far we'd come. A year ago, Patricia would have been stabilized and discharged back to the streets as quickly as possible. Today, she's getting comprehensive medical care, addiction counseling, and help finding transitional housing. That afternoon, I was walking through the parking lot where it all began when I ran into Marcus, our security guard. "Hey, Sarah," he called out. "Did you hear about Dr. Chen's latest project?" I shook my head. He's establishing a network of medical clinics specifically for homeless veterans in 5 major cities: Denver, Colorado Springs, Phoenix, Albuquerque, and Salt Lake City. Free treatment, no questions asked, no bureaucracy. He's funding it partly through hospital resources and partly through his own money and grants from veteran organizations. I smiled. That was Robert, always looking for ways to expand our impact and help more people. "You know," Marcus continued, "that night when you ran out here to help that guy in the snow, I thought you were absolutely crazy. I figured you were going to get fired for sure. And for what? Some homeless dude who probably wouldn't even remember you saved his life." He paused, looking thoughtful. "But I've been thinking about it a lot lately. What you did that night, it wasn't crazy at all. It was just right. And look how everything turned out. That one decision changed everything for this place." As I walked back into the hospital, I thought about Marcus's words. Sometimes doing the right thing feels impossible in the moment. Sometimes it requires you to risk everything you've worked for. Sometimes it means standing up to authority and facing the consequences of your choices. But sometimes, if you're incredibly lucky, doing the right thing not only changes the life of the person you're helping, but ripples outward in ways you never could have imagined. I thought about all the homeless patients we've treated in the past 6 months, all the people who might have died in parking lots or alleyways if not for our new policies and programs. I thought about the nurses and doctors who no longer have to choose between following orders and following their conscience. And I thought about Dr. Robert Chen, who went from being a forgotten veteran sleeping rough to becoming one of the most respected medical administrators in the region, all because one night a nurse decided that saving a life was more important than following the rules. 3 weeks ago, I received a call that reminded me why I love this job. It was from Dr. Williams at Denver General Hospital. "Sarah," she said, "I've got a situation here, and I need some advice." She went on to tell me about a young nurse who had been suspended for leaving her assigned ward to help during a mass casualty incident. The nurse had saved 3 lives, but hospital administrators were threatening to fire her for abandoning her post and violating emergency protocols. "What should I tell her?" Dr. Williams asked. I thought for a moment about that night in the parking lot, about the choice that had seemed so simple in the moment, but had consequences I never could have predicted. "Tell her," I said finally, "that sometimes the most important medical interventions happen outside the hospital walls. Tell her that compassion is not a violation of protocol, it's the whole point of protocol. And tell her that if her hospital doesn't understand that, maybe she needs to find a hospital that does." A week later, Dr. Williams called me back. The nurse had been reinstated with full back pay, and the hospital had implemented their own version of our Good Samaritan protocol. "One more thing," Dr. Williams said before hanging up. "The nurse wanted me to thank you. She said knowing that someone else had faced the same choice and come out stronger gave her the courage to fight for her principles." I hung up the phone and looked out my window at the parking lot below. Night was falling, and the orange security lights were beginning to flicker on. Somewhere out there, nurses and doctors and security guards and paramedics were making choices about how to treat the people in their care. I hoped that when they were faced with the decision between following the rules and doing what was right, they would choose compassion. I hoped they would remember that behind every policy and procedure is a human being who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And I hoped they would know that sometimes The most important thing you can do as a healthcare professional is to risk everything to save a life. Even if that life belongs to someone the system has forgotten. Because in the end, that's what medicine is really about, not the policies or the procedures or the profit margins. It's about the simple, fundamental belief that every human life has value, and that sometimes, in the middle of a cold winter night in a hospital parking lot, you get the chance to prove it. The photo on my desk serves as a daily reminder of that truth. It's a print from the security camera footage. 2 figures in the snow, a nurse and a patient, a person with a home and a person without one, someone with power and someone with none. In that moment, none of those differences mattered. What mattered was that one human being needed help, and another human being chose to provide it. That choice changed both of our lives forever, and every day, in hospitals and clinics and emergency rooms across the country, healthcare workers are faced with similar choices. The choice to see patients as people, not just medical conditions. The choice to prioritize compassion over convenience. The choice to risk their careers to save a life. I hope that when those moments come, they choose compassion. Because sometimes in the space of a single decision made in the depth of a winter night, you can change not just one life, but an entire system. And sometimes the person you save might just save you right back. TLDR, suspended for leaving my ER assignment to help a homeless veteran in our parking lot. 3 weeks later, that same veteran showed up as our new chief medical officer and offered me a promotion to director of patient advocacy. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything, and sometimes it gives you everything you never knew you wanted. Edit. Holy shit. This really blew up overnight. Thanks for all the awards and incredible messages. A lot of people are asking about specific details, so let me address some common questions. Edit it too. For those asking how Robert went from homeless to CMO so quickly, the timeline was actually about 6 months from when I saved him to when he became CMO, not 3 weeks. The 3 weeks was just how long my suspension lasted. He had maintained some connections from his military service, and once he got clean and had his license reinstated, his credentials were absolutely incredible. The hospital board was also dealing with some serious negative publicity about patient care practices, so when a decorated former army surgeon with impeccable qualifications offered to help reform the system, they jumped at the opportunity. Edit 3. Several people have asked about the medical details. Robert's homelessness was related to combat-related PTSD and prescription opioid addiction that started with legitimate pain medication for injuries sustained in Afghanistan. This is unfortunately very common among veterans. The guy never lost his medical knowledge or skills. He just lost his way for a while due to trauma and addiction. Recovery is absolutely possible with the right support systems. Edit 4. The medical board license restoration process took about 4 months and required extensive documentation, references from former colleagues, completion of an addiction treatment program, psychiatric evaluation confirming fitness to practice, and a probationary period with supervision. It's not easy, but it's possible for physicians who can demonstrate sustained recovery and fitness to practice. Edit 5. For those asking about Rodriguez, she lasted about 6 weeks in medical records before quitting. I heard through the grapevine that she's working at a different hospital system now, but I don't know the details and honestly don't care. I hope she learned something from the experience, but I'm not holding my breath. Edit 6. The Robert Chen Center for Homeless Healthcare has now treated over 800 patients and has a 78% success rate for getting people into stable housing and addiction treatment programs. Dr. Chen's network of veteran clinics is expanding to 15 cities by next year. If you're interested in supporting these programs, Denver has several excellent organizations working with homeless veterans that always need volunteers and donations. Edit 7. To all the healthcare workers who have DM'd me about facing similar situations, do the right thing. Always choose compassion over policy when someone's life is at stake. If your hospital doesn't support you, there are places that will. The Good Samaritan protocol is now being implemented in over 200 hospitals nationwide, so there are employers out there who value both clinical excellence and human decency. Edit 8. Someone asked about the legal implications of treating someone in the parking lot. Legally, we were covered under Good Samaritan laws since it was an emergency situation and I was acting within my scope of practice as a nurse. The hospital's concern was more about liability insurance and corporate policy than actual legal issues. That said, every situation is different, and healthcare workers should always be aware of their local laws and institutional policies. Update 1 year later. I can't believe it's been a year since I posted this story. So much has changed, and almost all of it for the better. The Good Samaritan protocol has now been adopted by hospitals in 23 states and is being considered for federal healthcare policy. Dr. Chen was featured on 60 Minutes and has become a national advocate for healthcare reform. Our hospital has won multiple awards for patient care and community service. Most importantly, we've saved lives. Hundreds of them. People who would have been turned away or ignored by the old system are now getting the care they need and deserve. I've also become something of an accidental activist. I've spoken at nursing conferences, testified before state legislature committees about healthcare policy, and helped establish patient advocacy programs at dozens of hospitals. But the best part is still the daily work. Yesterday, I helped a 22-year-old homeless woman named Jessica get into addiction treatment and transitional housing. 6 months ago, she was living under a bridge and dying from hepatitis C. Today, she's clean, healthy, and applying to community college to become a medical assistant. I want to help people the way you helped me, she told me. That's when I knew we were really making a difference. Final update, posted this story in Arsh Nursing, Arsh Medicine, and Arsh Veterans, and the response has been incredible. I've connected with healthcare workers from around the world who are implementing similar programs in their institutions. Dr. Chen and I are now working on a book about healthcare reform and patient advocacy. The message I want to leave you with is this: one person can make a difference. One choice made in a moment of moral clarity can ripple outward and change countless lives. Healthcare workers have enormous power to advocate for their patients and create positive change in the system. Use that power. Choose compassion. Do the right thing, even when it's hard. You never know who's watching. You never know whose life you might save. And you never know how that one act of kindness might change the world. Peace out, Reddit. Remember, be kind, do the right thing, and don't let anyone tell you that policies are more important than people. P.S. Robert asked me to mention that if any healthcare workers are struggling with addiction or PTSD, there are resources available. The Physicians Foundation has confidential support programs, and the American Nurses Association has similar resources for nurses. You're not alone, and recovery is possible. If a homeless veteran can become a chief medical officer, anyone can turn their life around with the right support. Stay strong, healthcare heroes. The world needs you now more than ever.